So I recently decided to take some guitar lessons, and I thought it would be cool to do a little series. I don't know how frequent it will be, but basically going to be taking lessons every 10 days to 2, maybe 3 weeks. It depends on my teacher, who is a pro musician, and so his schedule changes around. But that's cool with me because I like to have enough time to sort of practice in between lessons and actually sort of really sort of dig into what I'm learning. Now, I've only had my first lesson, and it's my first lesson in 20 years. I did learn the guitar when I was younger, started on the classical Spanish guitar when I was about 10. Electric guitar, I had my first lessons when I was about 12 probably, and then took those until I was about 16. So I did quite a lot, but you know, when you're young, you're only in it for the sort of glory stuff. So I was really just trying to learn my favorite Jimi Hendrix stuff and Carlos Santana and all those, whatever I was into when I was younger. But now I've got quite different goals. So although I started playing guitar again in January of 2020, it's taken me 15 or 16 months to have guitar lessons. And I would just say to anyone else who's getting back into the guitar after a long layoff, is don't wait too long to have your lessons. Really, my ego got in the way of me because I thought I don't want to look lame in front of a teacher, which is silly, really. So I wanted some time to develop my mechanical skills again, to feel comfortable and confident. But really, I reached the end of the road in how much I could learn by myself without some guidance from someone who knows what they're doing. So what I thought I'd do is when I have a lesson, if I think I've learned something that could help anyone else, then I'll just make a short video about it. Now, I sort of wished I had my lesson a week ago. I've practiced in those 7 days. I think I've done 4 practice sessions ranging from 10 to 15 minutes up to about half an hour. And I wish I'd sort of recorded a minute of each one so you could see what progression I might have made. I'm going to do a little reconstruction in a minute once I've told you what it is that I was learning. So you could just see, like, I can remember from a week ago when I did my first little bit of practice how difficult I found it. And I've improved a tiny bit over a week. And so it's cool to see how much you might improve after a certain amount of practice. And basically, I had my first lesson, and when you have your first lesson, you spend a lot of time discussing what you really want to achieve out of it. You go through sort of your history and your background and how much you've played and what sort of stuff you do know. And it's not really for me, it wasn't a very formal thing with my teacher, especially over Zoom as well. It's quite difficult. So we got to the point where I said to him, I want to learn how to basically back myself up. What I mean by that is, I love all these players that I watch now who play by themselves. Like, let's say on those Carter vintage videos, or when you watch great demos on the internet, and you can feel the musicality coming through in the way they play, because they're really good at following the changes. You come up with a sort of chord structure, and you don't have to, at a basic level, what I would be doing is basically playing a chord, normally a full bar-shaped chord, and then following on with a little bit of embellishment, and then moving on to the next chord. What I want to learn how to do over the next however long it takes is to imply the changes to the listener, so that you go on this sort of musical journey through a piece, and you feel like you've been led along in a really musical, interesting way. Now, you might know what I'm talking about. I hope I'm making sense. It's going to take a long time to get to that stage where I can really do that. So we started in a really basic way. We thought we'd sort of get me better at the 12-bar blues. Now, when I started learning again last year, blues was the thing I've been getting into. And one thing I noticed, whatever I tell you, whatever little things I get out of my lessons, when you spend an hour or 2 hours with a teacher, there are so many little things you see and learn. Because when you're learning by yourself, there's no one to guide you through all of the little nuances and things. You're sort of just picking up what you can from, let's say, YouTube or wherever you're learning from. So it's a good idea to have a lesson, even if it's only once every 4 or 6 weeks, if you can't afford to have it more often. And in fact, my teacher said a lot of his students have a lesson about once a month, and it gives them some time to do some practice in between. You're going to learn probably a lot more quickly if you have someone to guide you and tell you what the next step could be, and to give you little ideas for improvement and things like that. So the first step in this was, I said to him, I'd like to be able to play very simple sort of backing for a 12-bar blues, because growing up I was always the lead guitarist in the band. That's just the position I always wanted to be in. That's what I loved. And a friend of mine enjoyed playing rhythm guitar a lot, and he really wanted to be the rhythm guitarist. And actually, I always felt like maybe he was improving more quickly than I was, because I was getting all the glory bits and he was doing all the sort of intricate bits. So that's a lesson that's taken me many, many years to understand. So what we did first is this, and I'll show you on the guitar in a second, but my teacher's basically talking about learning different chord voicings. Now, if that doesn't make any sense to you, just in very brief terms, we might play, a chord is basically 2 or 3 notes. It normally has the root, that is the first note of the key that you're in. So if you were in C major, it would be C, and then you have the 3rd note and the 5th note, so that would be E and G in that case. Now, you don't have to play all the notes all of the time, is basically what I'm learning. So let me just show you very briefly what that means on the guitar itself. Okay, so I'm just going to go for the A7 chord, just because that's the chord I use. Often it's right in the middle of the fretboard, and I play a lot in A blues. So the A7 chord here, it's the E major 7 position from here. But you take that up with the bar. Now, I often would just play the whole chord, and then I might change to the D7. Now, if you hear that, obviously a lot of the bass comes through. So I could really just pick out a couple of notes that are in the mid or upper mid range of that. So I'm going to pick, if you see out of here, so I've got the 5th fret of the 4th string and the 6th fret of the 3rd string. And if I go up to the next chord, which would be the D7, which is up here, because you see that would be there. So. Now he says you can wrap your thumb over and play the root note at the top here, and then you can use the top of this finger to also mute the 5th string. So. And you actually get just a different sound to playing the whole. And it also leaves you more articulate if you want to. You've got other fingers left over rather than being stuck in these bar shapes. Now, this is just one way to do it of many, many, many different ways. You could actually hold this shape here like a D shape, but here, because obviously if you see the A, you're barring. Okay, for sure, this is not the sexy stuff you wanted to learn on the guitar, but for me, this is just the very basic beginnings of things, especially in the blues and blues rock world. But it will also lead into all other genres of music if you can learn just these most basic things. So even though I thought I was past this, it turns out I missed a lot of basics along the way. And this is just the first example of how to use chord voicings. And I'm hoping to go forward and learn so many different chord voicings to get a better understanding of how I can put them together, how I can add extensions on to make my playing more varied and more interesting. So the second section of what I'm starting to learn is about following the chord changes. And this is something that's confused me for a long time. So my teacher basically took me through the most basic way, and he was sort of keen to point out that it's not didn't really feel like a real world situation to do it in this way, but sometimes when you're learning you have to exaggerate the process. So basically what we did was, again, he said set up a 12 bar loop track, and then he says the most basic way to follow the changes is that at the end of each bar or each 2 bars, if it's a 2 bar section with that chord, you basically want to finish your lead phrase on the root note. It sounds very basic when you purposefully do this, but I want to show you, I'll do a sort of little reconstruction of what happened over the last week, because in the first couple of sessions of practice, I really was very, very clumsy about doing this. And just in the last couple of practice sessions, it's improved slightly. So let's just go over to the guitar and see how this works really. Okay, if you've never done this before, you're going to have to set up a loop track if you've got a looper. There's so many great videos around on the internet about how to use a looper, so I'm not going to do that just because other people can do it better than me. But basically, you're going to want to set up a loop with the 12-bar blues. And in my case, I just use the voicing that I showed you earlier, so... etc. And even that took me a while. I mean, basically on the first day, just getting any sort of good rhythm or anything was a bit difficult, and it sounded probably more like... You know, it just doesn't come naturally until you really sit there and think, I would have a drummer and a bassist and people sort of relying on me to just come in at the right moment. So I've got a little bit better at just... Anyway, I've still got a lot more practice to do in that regard, just to become a competent backing rhythm guitarist in a simple way. But I managed to make this loop, which sounds like this. Okay, so the idea is to start to recognize which chord of the structure you're in, the first, the fourth, or the fifth, and then to basically end that phrase on that root note of that chord. So the first chord being A, I can use this A here, fret 7 of the 4th string. So, for example, and then in the next section where it's a D chord, that root note is going to be fret 7 of the 3rd string. And then I would come back to the A. And it doesn't feel very natural because I'm used to just sort of playing whatever I want. It didn't matter what chord I was in. So I would play, let me show you with the backing track, what I might have played in the past. And my teacher demonstrated this as well, how it doesn't sound coherent when you just play whatever you want within that pentatonic shape. So I would often just play like that and find that I was completely lost. And although I was happy with myself for being able to play a decent lick of something or other that I'd practiced, it just didn't really come across musically as anything interesting or whatever. At the same time, I'm learning that you can't break the rules until you've learned them. So I've sat here for the last week, and in the first session, it really was a case of like this. So really just hovering around those root notes and just playing very basic things. Now, I've only progressed a little bit since then, and I want to just sort of record one round of 12 bars here, and then I can look back in a few weeks, maybe the next time I make one of these videos, and see if I've progressed much at all. But if this is something you're interested in doing, don't be discouraged that the first 2 or 3 sessions are going to feel very basic. It does start to improve slowly, so... So it still comes across as feeling very basic, but I'm finding that I can be a little bit more fluent with my phrases as I go along. And you find yourself sort of doing a little bit of a call and answer thing, which is something that starts to sound a little bit more musical. You know, you might do. So even then, when you haven't got the backing track, you start to feel like you can feel the structure of the 12 bar blues in your head, and you just start to hit the right root notes at the right time. Let's just go back over to the camera and I'll explain a couple of more things about that I feel like I've learned. And yeah. So a couple of things that I've taken away from this is, firstly, just practicing in a disciplined way actually means that you don't have to spend that long practicing. So normally my practice sessions would have started with a vague notion of I'm going to get better at using my right hand for rhythm. And then 1 minute into that, without any real thinking of what I was going to do, I'd have thought, oh, sod this, I'm just going to do some noodling. And then I'd have noodled for an hour. And then that's my time finished with on the guitar that day. And I've actually not progressed at all. Whereas 10 minutes of actually knowing what you're about to practice probably speeds you along a few weeks worth of noodling randomly, and you're focused and you're learning something specific. So it means that rather than going back to my second lesson and my teacher saying, what have you done? And me saying, oh, well, I've sort of noodled about and had a bit of fun. And then he's going to have to say, right, well, let's have another lesson about that basic thing that you thought was a bit basic and boring, so that we can really get it ingrained in. I can say, I spent a total of about 90 minutes over the last 2 weeks, maybe 2 hours practicing that. Here's an example of it. I feel like I've understood it. And then he'll say, great, let's just take it on a little step further. Now, I know this sounds really like, I don't want to be patronizing in any way. It's something I'm learning myself about practice. Just define your practice properly. Don't just, there is time for noodling. You can spend 60% of your time on a guitar noodling, and that's great fun. Even if you spent more time noodling but spent a proper 20 or 30% of your time with a distinct thing to practice, like this, you'll improve so quickly. So although it doesn't feel like I've done anything special in this, I've shown myself one thing, which is I can start a week not knowing what to do, have a lesson, and then spend time after that in a useful way. So the next phase, I think my teacher Aynsley said, was he'll show me how I can carry phrases over more than one chord to make it more interesting, because you can't just keep playing little phrases over each bar. It's not going to be anything interesting to play in the long run. But I'm really happy with what I've got out of this so far. It's definitely proved to me that lessons are a great investment in comparison to other guitar things. Pedals, amps and guitars are fantastic and part of the reason why I'm here in the first place. But if I really want to become a good guitar player, I need to spend a bit of money and a lot of time and some discipline in learning where I need to get to. And I hope, a lot of you might be on a similar journey to me. That's why you found my channel. I hope this made sense and was an interesting thing to see. And I'll be back in a couple or few weeks after the next lesson and to show you what I've learned then. So if this is your first time on the channel, most of my videos are based around gear reviews, gear demos, gear comparisons, that sort of thing. But every so often I throw in something different. So if you enjoy that, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. Cheers.